Chapter 25. It wasn't long until he came back into the room, holding a thin file in one of his hands. Supposedly the one I was supposed to bring to him last night. He seemed to have calmed down a bit, but the tension in his shoulders was still visible. He leaned back against the door as soon as it was closed, his eyes glancing over at me. "Did you, tell Xander about what she did?" I asked. Nico rubbed a hand down his face in mild frustration as he pushed himself from the door, slowly making his way to his desk. "No," he began, taking her back to him and telling him that he could drink from her again was punishment enough. My eyes trailed back to my drawing, furrowing a little. I guess that made me feel a little bit better, but I still felt bad for her. Not that feeling bad for her would do anything about it. Everything that Xander does to her is probably considered perfectly normal to most of the other vampires here. And yet she gets yelled at for trying to save herself. I probably would have tried the same thing if I was in the same situation as her. Nico threw the file down onto his desk, the sound causing me to flinch. "Chloe, I'm about to give you quite possibly the only rule that I insist you follow, so pay attention," he said. Even his voice held tension and even a bit of annoyance. I felt a wave of uneasiness wash over me as I instinctively sat a bit straighter. He turned his head partially towards me, enough for one of his stunning eyes to catch mine. The look on his face held complete seriousness, making me even more nervous. If this was the only rule he planned on giving me, then I was going to do anything I could to follow it. "You are not to let anyone except me drink from you," he spoke slowly. I immediately froze after he finished his sentence, my eyes growing wide. How on earth was I supposed to do that? "Understand?" he asked. I stayed silent as my mind began to race. I completely understood, but I wasn't entirely sure that I could succeed in following the rule. Still, I forced myself to nod. Nico turned to face me, leaning against his desk as one of his brows rose. "Are you sure? Because the look on your face is telling me otherwise." I quickly turned away, letting my hair cover my face out of partial embarrassment. How can I keep that from happening?" I asked quietly. Nico crossed his arms, his head faintly tilting to the side. "What do you mean?" he asked. His question seemed to cause an all-out mess to form in my head, causing for even more of a mess as my answer. "How am I supposed to keep a vampire from doing whatever they want with me? I know that I don't belong to them, but I still couldn't do anything to stop them. Even if I did try to stop them, they could still easily overpower me." Panic was quickly beginning to show as my words became quicker. What if they threatened to hurt or kill me? What if they just forced themselves on me? Then what would I do? I want to be a good and obedient pet and follow your rules, but I still can't stop a vampire from feeding from me. Even if I tried to stop it, I think I could get very far before I would just freeze up in fear. What if Before I even had time to process his movement, Nico was standing right beside me, one of his hands lightly gripping my shoulder. I didn't keep voicing my panic, now in fear that I wouldn't stop if I did. "Just don't put yourself in a position that it could happen, and I won't either." His voice was substantially calmer, soothing even. "And even if the situation still somehow arises, try to distract them for as long as possible until I find you." I just stared up at him, letting his words sink in. Simply put, that was not at all what I expected his response to be. "Okay?" he asked. I nodded once more, this time actually meaning it. Half of me still wondered why he was so persistent on making sure that he had me all to himself. Xander did say that I had the kind of taste that Nico would want all to himself. Chapter 26. Nico did the same thing for both lunch and dinner, left me here and ordered me something once he got back. I wondered how long this would go on. Not because I wanted to be near Xander again, but just because I really didn't like being left alone in here. Despite no one except Nico being able to get in here, I still didn't feel comfortable alone. I sighed, looking out the window at the stars. The moon was almost full, meaning the blood moon was almost here. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, fingers trailing down to the place that Nico first bit me. Nico obviously didn't succeed in his weaning off of blood plan, so I kind of wondered what his next plan for that night was. He had made it fairly clear that he didn't have a fond liking of the blood moon. Then again, I'm not sure many vampires really do. I took in a deep breath, holding it there before exhaling. I didn't want to keep that thought in my mind. Worrying about it wasn't going to do anything. Yet I knew that I was still going to worry about it. I turned my head as the bathroom door opened, returning my hand to my lap. Nico always looked a bit more relaxed after a shower. As always, his eyes scanned the room, making sure that I was still there. I kind of envied how he could still look good with wet hair and the loose clothes. The loose clothes that unfortunately hid what was underneath them. He walked forward towards me, brushing back the hair that was clinging to his face with his fingers. "I've noticed that you really seem to like looking at the night sky," he said. My lips formed a thin line before I turned back towards the window. "I do. It always fascinated me back when I was a child." I lightly drew my fingertips down the glass of the window, feeling the chill that the cold air outside gave it. I remember always being confused whenever the other kids my age would go inside as soon as the moon rose. I didn't understand because I always found that the night brought a much more beautiful view and was much more serene than the day. The sun would bring work and school, but once the moon came, everything seemed to calm down. I suddenly grew nervous once I realized that I had been reminiscing more than I should have. Luckily, when I turned back around, Nico didn't really seem to mind. In fact, he was gazing out the window curiously, like he was thinking over what I had said. "You never saw the sky in that pet shop, did you?" he asked, slightly turning his head towards me. I slowly shook my head, removing my hand from the window. I couldn't see it even if I tried. The cage I was placed in made it so that a certain shelf obstructed my view from pretty much anything. Nico accepted that answer, returning his eyes to the sky. His eyes furrowed for a moment as he looked at the moon. I'm guessing that he was having the same thoughts that I had. Still, I tried not to mainly focus on that, and instead think about how I just actually had a semi-comfortable conversation with him. Sure, we've had other conversations, but never in any of those had I felt comfortable enough to talk like I just did. I glanced at Nico through the corner of my eye. And he didn't even seem to care. I stared up at the ceiling from my place on the couch. No matter what I tried, I couldn't sleep. I partially wished that I had asked Nico if I could sleep with him again. I know that that sounded a bit weird, but despite all that, I wanted to be able to sleep as soundly as I did last night. Nico didn't even tell me to sleep here, I just did it, figuring that that was what I was supposed to do. And now I was quickly regretting it. Maybe I took last night for granted. I turned over to my side, facing where Nico was sleeping. I could tell that he was asleep, and judging by how stressed he's been lately, I really didn't want to wake him up because of some stupid irrational feeling that I've been having. Thinking back to what he said earlier today, I debated if waking him up for this would be considered as doing something against him. Chapter 27. Nico's POV. She actually looked peaceful this morning as she slept. Both her face and her body looked completely relaxed. I was honestly quite surprised by what she did last night. She never struck me as the kind of person that would try something like that. Even though it really wasn't that big of a deal. Judging by the look on her face when I caught her, she most definitely thought that it was. Then again, she pretty much thinks that everything is a big deal, that's just how she is. I glanced down at her, watching her chest steadily rise and fall. The heat that her body gave off was one of the main reasons that I didn't mind sleeping with her. I'm sure that most vampires have a guilty pleasure when it comes to the heat of their pets, whether they're willing to admit it or not. Something about it was just different. I let out a quiet breath. I should probably get up soon. I had yet another meeting with the committee today to discuss this month's blood collection. But I knew that if I got up, Chloe would wake up as well. Oh well. I moved the arm that wasn't around Chloe, using it to push myself up a bit. Chloe's movement caused me to pause. I looked down to see her hand now holding onto my shirt the best she could in her still asleep state. She had even managed to follow the couple inches that I moved away from her so that she was exactly how she was laying before. I huffed out another sigh as I slowly fall back against the bed. Fine. 10 more minutes. Chloe's pav. I sat cross-legged on the bed as I watched Nico get ready, already knowing that I wouldn't be joining him for breakfast today. Yet again, the absence of his body made it a bit more difficult to relax. Even so, I'm still very grateful that he allowed me to sleep with him again. I didn't even feel the slightest bit tired, which was a very surreal feeling for me. It felt nice. Nico turned his head back towards me as he finished buttoning up his vest. If you had the choice, where would you choose to sleep? He asked. My brows rose at the sudden question. Why was he asking it at all? Obviously, I would choose to sleep with him, but I'm not sure if saying that out loud would be weird or not. Sleeping with him was just so oddly calming and tranquil. I didn't have to worry about anything when I was next to him. I don't even believe that I had a nightmare last night, for the first time in years, nor did I wake up during the middle of the night. Both times that I had slept with him felt like the best rests that I had ever gotten. I looked down to the maroon blanket, running my finger across the soft fabric. If I had a choice, I would like to sleep with you, I responded quietly. Nico looked at me for a bit longer before he turned his head. Very well, he said. I quickly looked back up towards him. Very well? What the heck down he mean by that? Very well? I questioned. He turned his full body to me. If you want to sleep with me then you may. It took me a moment to fully process what he had just said, trying to make sure that I didn't mishear him. Once I was absolutely sure that I heard him right, my entire body perked up. I'm pretty sure that I even smiled for a brief moment before other thoughts quickly filled my mind. Are you sure? I don't want to do it if I cause you any kind of discomfort. I quickly said. As much as I wanted to sleep by his side, he was still my master and I didn't want to be a burden in any way. I'm sure, Chloe, he stated calmly. A small smile began to make its way onto my face. With that, Nico quickly fixed his collar and turned towards the door. I should be back a little after lunch, so I'll tell one of the slaves that you'll take the food from them when they deliver it. He stated. My smile quickly fell. Why will you be gone for so long? I asked. Sure, he leaves me alone a lot, but that was a decent 5 hours that he'd be gone. I've never been left alone for that long. He looked back at me once he reached the door. I have an unnecessarily long meeting that I have to attend. He replied, No,